Picture signing your name on a piece of paper. Not a contract, not a school form, a piece of paper that could get you executed. That is the basic problem with the Declaration of Independence. Today, it sits behind glass, safe and untouchable. In 1776, though, it was a declaration of treason against the most powerful empire on earth. This story picks up after the war had already started. Lexington and Concord had already happened. Bunker Hill had already happened. The colonies were fighting the King's army, but they had not officially said they were a separate country. That is like quitting your job, fighting security on the way out, and never sending the resignation email. Congress had to decide if this was still a protest or a permanent break. Around the same time, a pamphlet called Common Sense started spreading through the colonies. It was written by Thomas Paine, and it argued plainly that independence was not just possible, it was necessary. It sold in huge numbers for the time, reaching far more people than most political writing before it. Suddenly, independence was not just a fringe idea whispered in Congress. It was a conversation happening in taverns, homes, and town squares. Public opinion was shifting, and Congress could feel it. Thomas Jefferson wrote the main draft. John Adams pushed the hardest for independence. Benjamin Franklin helped sharpen the language, and John Hancock, President of Congress, put his name on it first and biggest. Congress picked 5 men, the Committee of 5, to explain to the world why the colonies were breaking away from Britain. Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, 5 men were asked to put the argument into words. No pressure. Just explain it to the world why the colonies were committing treason. Not everyone agreed this was the moment. John Dickinson argued the colonies were not ready. He was not a coward. He was cautious. Declare too soon, and the rebellion could get crushed. Wait too long, and it could collapse before it became anything real. Every delegate was staring at the same disaster and reaching a different conclusion. That is what makes the decision more interesting. This was not obvious to everyone in the room. There was also a practical reason to declare. Foreign countries like France were much more likely to help if the colonies looked like a new country, not just British subjects in revolt. The Declaration made recognition possible. France was Britain's rival, and helping the colonies could weaken Britain. That did not mean France was immediately ready to jump in. It meant Congress needed to make the case. The Declaration was not just written for the king, it was written for the world. Jefferson wrote the draft in secret in Philadelphia. He pulled from ideas that had been building for years: natural rights, government by consent, the idea that a king does not get unlimited power just because he was born into it. Jefferson did not invent every idea in the Declaration from scratch. He gave those ideas a voice that Congress could send to the world. Here is something people forget. The Declaration is not just one famous opening paragraph. Most of it is a long list of specific complaints against King George. Taxes without consent, blocking trade, dissolving colonial governments, keeping standing armies in the colonies, cutting off colonial rights. Basically, Jefferson wrote the most detailed breakup text in history, and then Congress had to proofread it. Congress was not going to rubber stamp Jefferson's draft. They argued over words. They cut lines. They softened some parts. One of the biggest cuts was a section attacking the slave trade. That is not a small edit. A document about liberty was edited by men who were still protecting slavery. That is one of the biggest contradictions in the entire story. The words were powerful. The country writing them was not living up to them. That does not make the Declaration meaningless. It makes it complicated. Here's the date most people miss: July 2nd, 1776. That is when Congress actually voted for independence, not July 4th. New York did not even vote yes on that day. Its delegates were waiting for instructions and did not officially approve until July 9th. Independence was not one clean, unanimous moment. It trickled in. John Adams thought July 2nd would be the date Americans remembered forever. He was almost right. Americans remembered the celebration. They just remembered it 2 days later. 2 days after the vote, Congress approved the final wording. That date, July 4th, is the one that stuck. That night, a printer named John Dunlap ran off an estimated 100 to 200 copies on broadsides. Those copies went out to towns, army camps, and newspapers before almost anyone had actually signed the document. People were reading the declaration out loud in public squares, while the official parchment copy did not even exist yet. That part feels backwards, but it's true. The words came first. The famous signatures came later. Most delegates did not sign that official parchment copy until August 2nd, a full month later. Some signed even later than that. The clean, dramatic signing moment you picture in paintings did not happen the way you think. There was no single perfect July 4th scene where everyone gathered around and became legends at once. First came the vote, then came the wording, then came the printing, then came the official parchment copy, then came the signatures. History likes quaint moments. Reality usually comes with paperwork. You've probably heard the story about the Liberty Bell ringing out to announce independence on July 4th. That story shows up in a lot of art in a lot of classrooms. Historians generally consider it a legend added decades later, not something documented at the time. That bell may have rung later with other bells when the Declaration was publicly read. That is different from the famous July 4th image. It is a great scene, it is just probably not what actually happened. None of this paperwork changed how the British saw it. They did not see a new nation being formed. They saw treason. Every signature made the risk personal. If the rebellion failed, those names were evidence. Treason was not a light accusation. It meant betraying the king. It meant the British government could treat the signers as criminals, not political opponents. That is why the signatures mattered so much. They were not just decoration at the bottom of a page. They were names attached to a rebellion. The delegates were not hiding behind an anonymous statement. They were putting themselves on the record. Hancock signed first, and biggest. Legend says he wanted the king to read it without glasses. That part is more myth than fact. Still, the giant signature works because the meaning is obvious. No hiding, no whispering, name on page. Franklin is famous for saying they must all hang together, or hang separately. Historians are not even sure he said it exactly that way. The idea was true either way. Every single signer, 56 names in total, was now tied to the same outcome. The Declaration did not end the war. It made the war official. It told Britain there was no clean way back. It told the world America wanted to be treated as its own country. Before this, a quiet peace with the king was still possible. After this, that option was gone. The colonies had crossed a line. The war would now decide whether those signatures became the beginning of a country or evidence in a treason case. The words were signed. Now they had to be defended. That fight was about to get harder, colder, and a lot more desperate for George Washington and his army. They did not just sign a piece of paper. They signed a dare to the most powerful empire on Earth. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this and like history, consider subscribing. I'll be posting videos like this every week.